Hindalco Industries, in collaboration with Xynteo, recently hosted Exchange 2024 event in the national capital, which brought business leaders, policymakers, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs for perspective-shaping conversations and purpose-action-oriented solutions to accelerate India's ambitions for an inclusive and planet-positive future. The 1.5-day event hosted an array of power-packed discussions and conversations to embrace ideas and realize new solutions in finding ways to balance the economic, social, and environmental needs of our world. A key highlight was the discussion themed Business and Sustainability Working Hand in Hand towards India at 2030, which was moderated by Mridu Bhandari from Network 18.
It's time to dive deep into the heart of this exchange, which is good growth. So in this particular session, I think we would like to know from all of you, how do you ensure that business and sustainability go hand in hand? What is it that you do at the DNA level of the business that ensures that sustainability is never forgotten and never left behind? So I'm going to ask each of you for examples of what your respective organizations have been up to. And if I can start with you, Mr. Pai. You know, Hindalco is, of course, a giant in aluminum and copper production. It's been a fantastic year. You partnered with ISRO for Chandrayaan's launch. You were also recognized as the most sustainable aluminum company in the world. So as an organization that champions sustainability, what is it that you do differently? And, you know, what is your secret sauce for really ensuring that you continuously remain a flag bearer of sustainability?
If you look in the Birla Group, the ESG is a very modern term, but the S part of it was pretty strong for our group for the last 70, 80 years since it's been founded. And that S part was based on the simple fact that we care about the people who work with us, who work around us, and hence the whole ethos of Birla's on putting up schools and temples. And so it's been there in the DNA of the company for a long time. So if you now start to expand and say, if you really care about people, then you start to say, you know, many of the things we are talking about are really for the betterment of people. You know, better water, better air, better life quality. Today, that whole thing is marketed under the term ESG and sustainability. So I think for us, when I look back at it, it's not that I had to go and say, hey, everyone in Hindalco, there is something here called sustainability. It was more of a natural evolution to say that we do so much CSR work, we do all that, but we now need to do, that's why I call it CSR plus, where you start to now look not just at you know, the things we were doing, but we started to go into water, waste. Carbon was a new concept, and you know, how do you reduce the carbon footprint?
Talking about that mindset shift, you know, Sandeep, if I can come to you. At JLL, you are dealing with large corporate clients, especially in the real estate sector, a sector that has been traditional, it's a legacy sector. So when you deal with leaders from this sector, are you seeing a change in perspective? What has your experience been like? And is there a recognition that each of them has a role to play? And then is there action after that recognition?
Before I start, I want to thank Vipul and the entire Xynteo team for doing a phenomenal job in bringing smart minds together. I'm not saying I'm a smart mind, but I'm surrounded by some for sure. I'll respond to your question through a real estate lens, because that's the industry I represent, Mridu. So short answer, yes. We are seeing a lot of discussions. We are seeing action happening on the ground as well. And you know, this journey started long back. There was a lot of focus on sustainability. It has been a CXO agenda. It's been on the board agenda for many, many years. But in the last few years, we've just seen companies take it to action a lot more seriously. And unlike what Satish said, not many companies focused on the S part. They probably said the right things, but in spirit, they weren't really driving it to action. Your company was indeed an exception for a very long time. Off late, fortunately, we've been starting seeing a lot of activity on the S part as well. So ESG holistically is getting a lot of attention. So answer to your question, Mridu, yes, we're seeing a lot of actions. Is that enough? Not at all. There's a lot more to be done. but we've started at least seeing the journey moving in the right direction. Thanks to Xynteo, we now have a coalition in India called Build Ahead that I'm very fortunate to be a part of. Build Ahead is a coalition that brings together financiers, cement steel manufacturers, developers, occupiers, and we engage policymakers and other folks in the ecosystem to drive construction towards green cement, green steel, and eventually aluminum, glass, etc. And that is addressing a big chunk of emissions that has been ignored so far. And in the last year and a half or so that this coalition's existed for, we moved the needle significantly. We've driven awareness, we've come up with measurement tools, we've come up with a lot of things that are going to drive the activity in the right direction.
And Vikas, if I can come to you, India, of course, both India and China will have a pivotal role to play to curb global warming at about 1.5 degrees is what we're talking right now. So one critical lever in this puzzle is that of availability of finance. And I know that said fund is quite uniquely positioned as an integral ecosystem player that really directs efforts in the right direction. So where do you see the biggest levers that need to be actually actioned? And what are some of the most innovative funding mechanisms that companies can now look at for accelerating their decarbonization journeys?
That's a very heavy question for me, but I'll try and do justice to it. But before I say that, I think I want to acknowledge that thanks for bringing the balance to this panel. Exchange yesterday started off with an all-woman panel, and we're ending today with an all-male panel.
Yes, and I've had the pleasure to moderate both of those. So
yes,
thank
exactly.
You.
You see, as Set Fund, what we have seen over the last 6 years of our journey is that a lot of the capital flows we keep on talking about that should come from the global north to the global south, and which are basically the bone of contention when it comes to the climate discussions, say the COPs. Every time we look at climate finance, we talk about that, yes, the money should come as some sort of a reparation from the global north to the global south. But the reality is that the geopolitics and the economies on the global north themselves are so challenged right now that expecting them to be able to kind of fund this, pay for the climate change that the global north caused to the global south is probably never going to happen. So we have to look at different sources of capital that can come from around the world into the economies like India, so that we can actually craft our own economic and social journey which can mitigate climate change for us. I also believe that when you talk about the ecosystem approach, I think it's extremely important to kind of go with that approach by, as philanthropy, we have to work with a wide variety of partners. If we only start to work with the typical nonprofits, the think tanks, and the government, we leave behind a large part of the private sector, a large part of the academia, a large part of civil society. I think it's very important as philanthropies to keep an open mind in terms of working with a wide variety of partners, so that you kind of use those perspectives to kind of bring about the change at the level at it deserves. See, Energy Leap is one good example that you saw earlier in the day when we were looking at innovation as being a key element of decarbonization, because you have to look at those early stage innovations coming and you have to support them to a certain scale. India is uniquely positioned compared to, say, any other country in the world. We have heard all through the day today that how much of an opportunity it is to kind of, have a renewable energy being a RE champion, be it for manufacturing, be it for distribution, or be it for generation. Hell, we could even create our own electricity market in South Asia, for example. But the reality is that the capital flows are not coming to India as they should. At least we're not seeing at the scale that we had hoped that they would.
Okay, so from finance, let me then shift focus to marketing and communication, and that's critical for any project or any sort of initiative that really takes place. So Srini, from that perspective, how do you see this shaping up? What needs to be done? What role can media and communications and marketing at large play in really driving the sustainability agenda for India 2030? And what are the big opportunity areas that you see right now?
I think the latest IPCC report said this, that by 2050, behavior change alone can reduce carbon emissions by about 40 to 70%. So that's an interesting stat. But then there is research which we ourselves have done as WPP, which says that actually today 60% of consumers globally are very skeptical about brands and corporates talking about sustainability. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there. And the other piece of data, which is again quite interesting, is the gap between those who care about the environment and those who are willing to pay a premium is actually increasing by the year. So while communication and all of that is important, it's obviously responsible communication that one needs to kind of bring to the table, and therefore coming to our role as let's say WPP, to kind of set ourselves up as a responsible communications partner. I mean, firstly, of course, we have to put our own house in order. So like, all other corporates, despite being an advertising and media company, we have our own commitments when it comes to being carbon neutral across our operations by 2025, and in fact across our entire supply chain by 2030, which means all the media partners we deal with and all the content partners, etc. It kind of includes that ecosystem as well. So that was the thing which, of course, put out globally. But closer home in India, while we were setting up the country management structure, which is actually fairly recent, it's about 5 years old, we ensured that social impact and sustainability is a very key part of our growth agenda in India, which is why we are perhaps the only advertising media company which is part of Xynteo in India. So that's kind of got ingrained into our strategy from day one. Apart from that, given that we employ a lot of creative folk, a lot of the younger folk who are on the one hand very keen to work in these areas, it's also important that we give them the right tools, the right kind of training. So there's a huge emphasis in WPP on training when it comes to green claims, when it comes to even what kind of clients to work with today, and what kind of communication strategies to come up with. Thanks to Xynteo, we worked very closely with Satish's team to create this brand called Kosala. Satish can probably talk more about it. This is to actually help the Weaver community in Chhattisgarh.
Vipul, you've heard from everyone here. Xynteo, of course, advises companies on greener and more inclusive pathways for their core business operations. So what do you think are the key levers as we look at India 2030 and we look at a country that really believes and drives good growth? What are those key levers that will really make long-lasting positive impact on the nation?
Thanks, Midhu. I think fundamentally as Xynteo, we believe that business are a force for good, a force that can bring positive social and environmental impact. I think the starting point really is how do we find those interventions which work at the intersection. So there is a commercial business model, but there's an intrinsic social and environmental impact that comes out of it. So it's very fundamental because that enables replication and scale, and hence results in transformative impact. In my mind, I think when we work with our partners, 3 key levers that we have learned over the years, which possibly helps us progress our work. One is for us to be able to work with very pioneering businesses and leaders. Businesses who have very intrinsic sustainability in their business strategy, and leaders who are deeply committed in driving change. The second is when businesses recognize that the problems that we're trying to solve cannot be solved alone, and hence the need to collaborate. Collaborate across your value chain, collaborate across even your competition, your partners. It's extremely important that you are able to bring the right set of organization together to find the solution and drive that change. And the third thing is for us to be able to be patient to see the outcomes and the outputs, and have the agency to try and fail, and be able to find that one success which is replicated could create the transformative impact.
With that, it's a wrap of this very, very insightful session. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us today. And a huge round of applause for the incredible work you all are doing together.
Hindalco Industries, in collaboration with Xynteo, recently hosted the Exchange 2024 event in New Delhi. Amongst the host of engaging sessions, a key highlight of the event was a special conversation between Pramod Bhasin, founder and former CEO, Genpact, and CNBC TV 18's Ashmit Kumar on prosperous and sustainable business.
Let's begin with that. Between the days of GE Capital and now, many winters have passed, and these winters have seen many exploits, many enterprises that have grown, that have prospered under your watch, that are oriented towards sustainability. How would you describe this journey? How would you look back?
You're being very kind. This journey has been entirely pockmarked by many failures along the way, many things that haven't worked, many really bad investments, many failed ventures and attempts to more good. I can think of at least 3 or 4 right away. But hopefully within that, also a journey that brought many successes. And I think if you don't try, you're not going to get there. And so I've been lucky enough to have the opportunity, and very fortunate. We're very fortunate in our lives, especially in a country like India. We represent such a tiny proportion of this country. I've just been very, very lucky and fortunate to be able to try. And so I think the journey's been very exciting, and many different types of things have happened along the way.
Well, just recalling again, I keep looking back at some of the news reports I was going through across the many, many years that we've reported on you and your exploits. You've worn so many hats. I think beginning as a CA, then banker, then as an IT captain, as an IT leader. Then we've seen more recently your work towards going back to finance, towards data security, new technologies. So there's so much to talk about, but we'll try to focus on the sustainability part. How, while you're managing the balance sheet on one hand, there is also a very clear orientation towards energy transition, towards waste management, towards renewable energy.
Yes.
What is the mantra? What is the secret sauce in managing the two sides?
So if I may go to a different place, which is Asha Ventures, if I may go to that. I don't know how familiar you are with that, which is what we started. And we've built that out as, it's called Asha Impact, as a venture which is really an impact fund. Clicks Capital does some of it, but I think Asha Impact and Ventures does a lot more. I started with a friend of mine, with a co-founder, Vikram Gandhi. He teaches impact. And our goal was, we felt there's enough money in the system looking at normal, regular investments, private equity, etc. I work with Kedara as well as an operating hat as private equity. But the fact is, there's not enough people looking at the impact space where you're looking at companies which are playing in a less formal sector, with less rules defined, with less ability to forecast what will work or what will not work, and who actually need more funding and have the greatest need for funding. India remains profoundly underbanked, profoundly. And the reason, I mean, one of the reasons for that, obviously the many reasons, is we should have about 35 more banks than are currently being allowed. And therefore, the current banks prosper brilliantly and make enormous profits, whereas the fact is that MSMEs, etc., smaller companies, really are underbanked and have a very hard time raising enough money at the scale they should in an emerging economy like ours. So our aim with Asha Ventures has been to focus on companies which are treading relatively new ground. So it could be in waste management, it could be in energy conservation, it could be in diagnostics, it could be in distribution of generic medicines to tier 2, tier 3 towns, it could be in financial inclusion, but where it may take us a little bit longer, a little bit harder to underwrite, not a little bit, sometimes very much harder to underwrite. Sometimes we make enormous fools of ourselves because we invest in companies with a promise which we don't understand sufficiently and it doesn't work. But generally, we find that in India particularly, there is an opportunity to make investments which are very substantial in reaching the bottom of the pyramid or reaching a completely new sector of people in a far more organized, formal way. I'll give you an example. The TrueMeds, I'm just taking one example. TrueMeds is a company which actually has found a way to distribute generic medicines to tier 3, tier 4 towns. Now, that's a formidable task. If you think about the price points at which those are distributed, at which it's manufactured, the cost of getting it there, the way you can distribute it, the prescription, all of that, it's a formidable task to get that together. But that's where we come in, and that's where we hope we can make a difference by being longer term investors than we've been, than perhaps others are. As well as being willing to make that leap of faith that you need, which is probably greater here than it is anywhere else.
Apart from a series of insightful discussions and sessions, the Exchange 2024 event also had a marketplace, which was a curated experience showcasing promising ventures that offer commercial solutions, not just for India, but also for some of the world's most pressing challenges. A space that enabled fostering meaningful opportunities and connections in the areas of circularity, energy and decarbonization, healthcare and sustainable livelihood, thereby truly representing the spirit of collaboration to resolve systemic challenges the world is facing.